Across the horizon of the Pacific, a new chapter of global tension is unfolding, one that could reshape the balance of power in Asia. The recent deployment of the U.S. Typhon mid-range missile system to Japan was more than a military exercise. It was a bold statement of power and strategic intent. That message has not gone unanswered. Russia and China swiftly issued stern warnings. Diplomatic lines flared, and the delicate regional balance was thrown into sharp relief. In the Indo-Pacific, this contest of power extends far beyond missiles. It is a convergence of influence, economic interests, and high-stakes strategy. The world is now watching a region where a single missile, a few critical decisions, and the strategies of major powers could determine the course of global politics for years to come. The question is no longer whether tensions will rise, it is what moves these global powers will make next. The missile system in question, known as Typhon, represents a new class of U.S. ground-based strike capability. Originally fielded by the U.S. Army as part of its Mid-Range Capability (MRC) portfolio, Typhon is designed to launch a range of precision-guided weapons, including Tomahawk cruise missiles and Standard Missile-6 (SESM-6) interceptors. Its presence in Japan as of 2025 marked the first time this capability was deployed on Japanese soil, even if temporary and tied to joint exercises. From its position at Marine Corps' Air Station Iwakuni, Typhon's reach extends across the East China Sea and toward key strategic areas throughout northeastern Asia. This shift in posture signifies an evolution in U.S. deterrence strategy and highlights how ground-based missile systems are now integrated into the alliance's defense architecture rather than relegated solely to Navy and Air Force domains. Russia and China did not take this development lightly. In a coordinated diplomatic pushback, both governments publicly criticized the deployment, asserting it undermines regional stability and threatens their national security interests. The Chinese Foreign Ministry demanded the immediate removal of the Typhon system, claiming that it risked escalating an arms race and provoking confrontation in a region already fraught with geopolitical fault lines. Officials in Beijing stressed that such weapon systems, even when deployed temporarily under the guise of an exercise, have far-reaching implications for strategic balance, especially given their capability to reach key military and infrastructure targets along the Chinese coast. Moscow's response was similarly forceful. A spokesperson for Russia's foreign ministry condemned the decision, framing it as a destabilizing step in Washington's broader effort to expand ground-based missile capabilities in Asia. According to official statements, Russia viewed the deployment near its periphery as a direct strategic threat. Moscow hinted that such moves could invite reciprocal measures and expressed concern that the presence of these intermediate-range systems would force a reassessment of regional doctrine and defense postures. The joint Russian-Chinese protest underscores an emerging alignment in their strategic outlook, one that views UEC-led military deployments in Asia as provocative rather than defensive. Behind the headlines of diplomatic protests lies a deeper story about the nature of modern military strategy. The U.S. and Japan framed the deployment of Typhon as part of Resolute Dragon, an annual joint training exercise designed to enhance interoperability and readiness between allied forces. In an era where missile technology and long-range precision fires have become central to deterrence, Japan's willingness to host such systems, even on a temporary basis, signals a shift from strictly defensive posture toward a more integrated role within the alliance's deterrence framework. It also reflects Tokyo's increasing concern over regional security dynamics, particularly as China's military capabilities and assertiveness in the East and South China Seas continue to grow. These developments arrive against a backdrop of rising regional tensions. China has been enhancing its own missile forces, investing heavily in both conventional and hypersonic systems capable of challenging U.S. and allied assets throughout the Pacific. At the same time, Russia has been bolstering its military presence across the Asia-Pacific and the Arctic, conducting joint air and naval patrols that underscore its desire to assert influence beyond its traditional sphere. In turn, the U.S.-Japan alliance continues to deepen its cooperation, not only through exercises like Resolute Dragon but also through expanded joint planning, intelligence sharing, and coordinated investment in modern capabilities. The historical context of these interactions cannot be ignored. Japan's post-World War II constitution and pacifist orientation long limited its ability to project military power beyond self-defense. However, Changes in regional threats, including North Korea's missile tests and China's growing blue water naval presence, have driven Tokyo to reinterpret its security doctrine. The acceptance of U.S. missile systems on its territory, even temporarily, represents a significant shift in Japanese policy, one that has drawn both domestic debate and international scrutiny. From a broader strategic perspective, the deployment of long-range missile systems like Typhon underscores the evolving nature of deterrence in the 21st century. Where once naval carriers, strategic bombers, and allied ground forces dominated calculations, today's security environment places emphasis on precision strike, integrated air and missile defense, and multi-domain coordination. Missile systems based on land can complement naval and air forces by providing a persistent, dispersed, and difficult-to-neutralize layer of capability, complicating adversary planning and enhancing allied deterrence. This shift has not gone unnoticed by Moscow or Beijing, both of which have taken public and private steps to reinforce their own strategic forces, including missile units and air defense networks. The international reactions to the U.S. move highlight a broader challenge facing policymakers: how to balance deterrence and reassurance in a region where historical memories, territorial disputes, and rising military capabilities intersect. China's calls for withdrawal reflect not only strategic concerns but also geopolitical narratives that paint U.S. actions as provocative. Similarly, Russia's objections tie into its own perceptions of encroachment and alliance expansion near its sphere of influence. For Tokyo and Washington, the challenge lies in navigating these perceptions while maintaining a credible defense posture capable of deterring potential aggression without crossing thresholds that might lead to miscalculation. Amid these tensions, the United States has continued to underscore that joint exercises and deployments like Typhon's presence in Japan are defensive in nature, aimed at improving readiness and interoperability with treaty allies rather than targeting any specific nation. Indeed, Japanese officials reiterated that the deployment was temporary and tied to training activities, and that no decision had been made about permanent stationing. Still, the very presence of land-based missile systems with the range to reach distant targets signals a new phase in the alliance's approach to regional security, one that accepts that threats are not only naval or aerial, but also ground-launched and highly mobile. The deployment of intermediate-range missile systems to Japan has reshaped military diplomacy in the Indo-Pacific, prompting responses not just in Tokyo and Washington but from capitals in Beijing and Moscow as well. These reactions illuminate the deep strategic fault lines in the region, where advances in military technology, allied cooperation, and historical tensions combine to form a complex security environment. The consequences of these developments are far from settled, and they will continue to influence defense planning and diplomatic engagement across Asia and beyond. As the dust settled on the initial round of diplomatic condemnations, the geopolitical implications of the Typhon missile deployment in Japan began to take shape with sharper clarity. Beyond headline protests from Beijing and Moscow, what was evolving was a larger narrative about the future of military deterrence in the Asia-Pacific region and the strategic interplay between alliance commitments and great power rivalry. For decades, U.S. defense strategy in Asia had centered on freedom of navigation, forward presence, and the integrated power of naval and air forces. But with the expansion of land-based strike capabilities such as Typhon, the landscape is changing, and not without significant pushback from rival states that view these moves as threatening their core security interests. China's response was immediate and forceful. At regular press briefings, spokespeople from China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs reiterated their opposition to the U.S.-Japan deployment, characterizing it as a threat to regional strategic stability and a violation of the legitimate security interests of neighboring states. Officials urged both the United States and Japan to rethink their actions and to respect the concerns of other countries in the region. They warned that deploying such missiles could inadvertently escalate military tension and risk sparking an arms race in East Asia, a scenario Beijing was desperate to avoid but felt compelled to address publicly. Beijing's rhetoric invoked historical memories as well as strategic logic. References to past conflicts and concerns about regional trust underscored a deeper unease about foreign military presence in Asia. Chinese officials framed their objections in terms of threats not just to territorial sovereignty but also to the broader equilibrium that has allowed economic growth and relative peace in the region for decades. Compounding these diplomatic overtures were state media narratives that highlighted the perceived destabilizing Impact of foreign weapon systems being deployed near sensitive maritime routes and contested areas. This messaging was intended to galvanize domestic support while signaling to regional states that China would not passively accept what it views as external encroachment. Russia's articulation of its objections took a slightly different tone but was no less consequential. Moscow's official statements focused on the strategic threat posed by ground-based intermediate-range missile systems deployed near its periphery. Russian Foreign Ministry representatives framed the deployment as part of a broader pattern of U.S. military expansion that, in their assessment, threatened not only regional security but also global strategic stability. The language used in these protests suggested that Russia might consider responses beyond diplomatic condemnation if such deployments became a recurring feature of U.S. strategy. Analysts noted that such rhetoric, while not an immediate indicator of military escalation, does reflect a deeper concern about the shifting balance of power and the encroachment of Allied military infrastructure into areas Russia considers sensitive. Amid these geopolitical ripples, Japan's own role in the unfolding drama attracted intense scrutiny. For Tokyo, the decision to host the Typhon system, even temporarily, represented a shift in its defense posture that had been gradually evolving over several years. Japan, bound by a post-World War II pacifist constitution, had traditionally maintained a strictly defensive military doctrine. However, changes in the regional security environment, including North Korean missile tests, Chinese naval expansion near the East China Sea, and increased Russian military activity had prompted Tokyo to reconsider aspects of its policy. Hosting U.S. missile systems, even for exercises, signaled that Japan was willing to expand its cooperation with Washington beyond conventional domains. This evolution was not without internal debate. Within Japan's political establishment and strategic community, some voices expressed concern that integrating U.S. ground-based strike capabilities into joint exercises could be perceived as abandoning the country's defensive principles. Others argued that modern threats required modern responses, and that alliance interoperability, including shared access to advanced missile systems, was essential to deterrence and national security. Tokyo's leadership faced the delicate task of balancing these internal considerations with the external pressures and strategic calculations posed by China's rise and regional military dynamics. Observing these developments, U.S. policymakers and defense analysts emphasized that the deployment of systems like Typhon was not intended to provoke conflict, but rather to enhance deterrence and alliance resilience. In official statements, U.S. defense representatives stressed that the exercise deployments were temporary and part of ongoing efforts to improve joint readiness. They highlighted that such measures strengthened the ability of allied forces to coordinate in response to a wide range of contingencies, from humanitarian crises to potential military confrontation. Yet the strategic optics of the situation cannot be divorced from the military realities on the ground. Missile systems such as Typhon possess ranges capable of reaching deep into competitor territory, a fact that both Beijing and Moscow seized upon in their public responses. From Iwakuni in western Japan, Tomahawk cruise missiles and SM-6 interceptors launched from ground platforms create a strikingly different operational picture from what existed even a decade earlier. Moreover, the integration of these systems into joint exercises alongside Japan's self-defense forces and U.S. Marine units complicates the calculus for any potential adversary, forcing them to account for precision fires operating from land as well as sea and air. Regional military postures have also adapted in response. Neighboring countries are closely monitoring the strategic balance in East Asia, and some have initiated upgrades to their own forces or strengthened cooperation with external partners. This includes investments in longer-range missile technology, ANTI, access area denial, A2AD systems, and enhanced air defense networks designed to counter a range of threats. In turn, these moves feed perceptions in Beijing and Moscow that military modernization and alliance introduction of advanced systems are part of a broader strategic competition rather than isolated events. The long shadow of historical rivalries also shapes how these military developments are interpreted. Memories of past conflicts, territorial disputes, and regional mistrust make any deployment of offensive weapon systems a sensitive subject. For many in Asia's capitals, including Beijing, Tokyo, and Seoul, military moves by one party inevitably trigger strategic recalibrations by others. In this context, the Typhon deployment serves as both a symbol and a catalyst of a deeper strategic realignment, one in which the distinctions between defensive and offensive postures are increasingly blurred. It becomes clear that the interplay between deployments, diplomatic protests, historical grievances, and strategic adaptation is far from settled. What began as a training exercise has grown into a touchstone of regional military dynamics, prompting intense debate among leaders in Washington, Tokyo, Beijing, and Moscow. The aftermath of these developments will shape defense planning and alliance relationships for years to come. The Indo-Pacific region stands at a strategic inflection point, where the deployment and pushback over intermediate-range missile systems like Typhon are emblematic of the broader contest for influence, deterrence, and power in the 21st century.